The sun had just started to dip below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the large, elegant house where the party was taking place. The music floated through the air, a mixture of laughter, clinking glasses, and upbeat tunes that filled every corner of the grand hall. Balloons of every color bounced gently as they swayed with the light breeze from the open windows. Guests in shimmering dresses and smart suits moved gracefully across the room, chatting and smiling, their excitement palpable. Among the lively crowd, there was a young girl in a wheelchair, carefully navigating through the crowd, trying her best not to bump into anyone. She was smaller than most of the children at the party and moved more slowly. Relying on the wheels to carry her across the polished wooden floor, she had been looking forward to this party for days. Not just for the music or the lights, but because it was a chance to be around people and feel a little normal for a while. Her parents had encouraged her to enjoy the celebration, and she had put on her best dress, a soft pink one with little flowers embroidered on it, which made her feel like a princess. She rolled into the room with a small, hopeful smile on her face. Taking in the decorations and the laughter, the night was winding down, and the energy in the party had shifted from excitement to a warm, calm buzz. The young girl in the wheelchair sat near the edge of the room, a soft smile playing on her lips. She had spent the evening facing fear, finding courage, and discovering the kindness of someone who had stood by her side when she needed it most. The maid remained close, a quiet guardian whose presence had changed the course of the night for the girl. Every time the girl looked up, she saw the unwavering support in the maid's eyes, and it gave her a profound sense of reassurance and strength. The bullies had disappeared from the center of the room, their whispers subdued, their earlier confidence completely gone. They lingered on the periphery, no longer daring to approach. The girl watched them for a moment, her chest rising and falling steadily as she realized she no longer felt fear. The terror that had gripped her earlier in the evening had been replaced by a cautious sense of triumph. She had survived, and more importantly, she had been respected and defended. It was a small but powerful victory, and she felt it in every fiber of her being. Guests began to approach her slowly, offering words of encouragement, smiles, and small gestures of kindness. One child offered to share a piece of cake, while another invited her to watch a small game nearby. Each gesture, simple and genuine, helped the girl feel included and valued. She responded with soft smiles and tentative laughter, discovering the joy of human connection and the power of empathy. For the first time that night, she felt that the party was truly hers to enjoy. Not a space where fear dominated her experience, the maid stayed beside her, speaking softly, her words full of warmth and reassurance. "You were so brave tonight," she said. "You faced something difficult, and you didn't let it break you. That is something very special. Remember it?" The girl nodded, feeling the truth of those words sink deep into her heart. She realized that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the courage to continue despite it. The presence of the maid had not only protected her physically, but it also taught her the power of quiet strength and the importance of standing with someone when they need it most. As the evening progressed, the girl began to interact more freely with the guests. She laughed at jokes, shared small stories, and even joined in a simple game with other children her age. The maid watched from nearby, offering gentle encouragement when needed, but allowing the girl the space to engage and enjoy herself. The room felt alive in a new way, filled with moments of connection and understanding that had not existed before. The girl felt a profound sense of belonging, a realization that courage and kindness could reshape her world in meaningful ways. The parents, who had been busy hosting and entertaining, finally noticed the girl and approached her with concerned eyes. They saw her smiling, engaged with others, and surrounded by warmth and support. They could see the traces of fear and anxiety that had existed earlier, but now those shadows were fading. They looked at the maid with gratitude, understanding the vital role she had played in protecting and empowering their daughter. The maid's quiet courage had made the difference between a night of terror and a night of growth and connection. The girl reflected on the events of the evening. She thought about the initial fear, the cruel words, and the actions of the bullies. She remembered the trembling in her hands, the tightness in her chest, and the loneliness she had felt. Then she thought about the maid, whose calm authority had stopped the bullies, and whose gentle words had reminded her that she was not alone. She realized that the maid's courage had inspired others to recognize her value and worth, and that the kindness of those around her had transformed her experience entirely. The girl felt a sense of empowerment that was new and profound. The bullies, now at a safe distance, glanced at the girl and the maid, realizing the impact of their behavior. Their arrogance had been shattered, and a quiet shame began to settle over them. They could see that cruelty did not lead to power in this situation. It only led to isolation and judgment. The girl, observing them, felt no anger, only a quiet confidence. She understood that she did not need to respond to their cruelty with fear or retaliation. She had already won by standing firm and allowing others to support her. The maid gently adjusted the girl's position in the wheelchair, ensuring she was comfortable. She spoke softly about resilience, about how moments of fear and challenge could be met with courage and support. "You have shown that even in difficult times, there is strength inside you," she said, "and there are people who will stand with you when you need them. Never forget that." The girl absorbed these words, feeling a deep sense of understanding and appreciation. She realized that the lessons of the evening were more than just about facing bullies. They were about trust, courage, kindness, the power of human connection. Guests continued to gather around, drawn by the warmth of the girl's courage and the quiet authority of the maid. Some offered compliments. Others shared stories of their own experiences with fear or intimidation. Each interaction reinforced the sense of community and empathy that had grown in the room. The girl felt a connection to each person who approached her, understanding that shared experiences of courage and kindness could create bonds stronger than fear or cruelty. The music, once loud and playful, now seemed to underscore the new mood of the room. It carried a rhythm of warmth, connection, and reflection. The girl felt herself becoming more comfortable, more confident in her interactions, more aware of the value of courage and support. She laughed softly with another child, feeling the joy of inclusion and friendship. The maid smiled, recognizing the transformation that had taken place, and silently celebrated the girl's resilience and growth. As the evening drew closer to its end, the girl took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. She thought about the fear she had felt when the bullies had cornered her, the trembling in her hands, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Then she thought about the maid, the unwavering presence that had stood beside her, blocking harm and offering reassurance. She thought about the guests who had watched, learned, and begun to show kindness and empathy. In that moment, the girl realized that fear could be met with courage, cruelty could be met with compassion, and isolation could be met with connection. The party concluded with small waves and goodbyes. The girl felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. She had faced fear, experienced unkindness, and emerged stronger and more confident. The maid guided her gently, helping her navigate through the guests as they left, each offering a nod or a smile of encouragement. The girl's heart felt full, not just because of the protection she had received, but because of the understanding that courage, kindness, and solidarity had the power to transform difficult moments into lasting growth. As they prepared to leave, the girl turned to the maid and smiled. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice full of sincerity. "You helped me when I was scared, and I will never forget it." The maid's smile was gentle and warm. "You did all the brave work yourself," she replied. "I was just here to remind you of the strength you already had inside. Always remember that." The girl nodded, feeling the truth of the words and the depth of the lesson she had learned, walking toward the exit. The girl felt a sense of peace and empowerment that she had never experienced before. The night had been filled with fear, challenge, and cruelty, but it had also been filled with courage, protection, and the quiet strength of human kindness. She realized that moments of fear were opportunities to discover resilience, and that support from others could create a lasting sense of security and confidence. The maid pushed the wheelchair steadily, moving toward the door while the girl glanced back at the room that had been both a place of fear and a place of growth. She understood that she had emerged stronger, not just because of the intervention of one brave person, but because of the ripple effect of courage and kindness that had spread through the room. Each person who had witnessed the events, each small gesture of support, had contributed to a transformation that went beyond the night itself. As they stepped out into the quiet evening, the girl felt the cool night air on her face, a symbol of renewal and freedom. She realized that she had been tested and had grown through the experience. Fear had been faced, cruelty had been countered, and courage had been discovered in both herself and in others. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the maid, for the guests, and for the lessons that had been learned. The night had shown her that even in the face of adversity, bravery, compassion, and human connection could create a powerful and lasting impact. The girl looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling faintly above, and felt a quiet sense of hope. She understood that the challenges she faced would continue in life, but she also knew that she could face them with courage and the knowledge that kindness and support were always possible. The maid's guidance and protection had not only kept her safe, but had illuminated a path of bravery, empathy, and resilience that she could carry forward. The girl felt ready to face the world, knowing that fear could be met, cruelty could be challenged, and courage could shine brightly, even in the darkest of moments. Her eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. At first, everything seemed wonderful. A few friends waved at her, some older kids nodded politely, and she felt a small surge of happiness. For a moment, she could forget about her struggles and just enjoy the bright, colorful world around her. But as she moved closer to the center of the party, she noticed a group of teenagers standing together near the buffet table. They were whispering and glancing in her direction. She couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but she could feel the sharp sting of their eyes on her, and her small smile faltered. The girl tried to focus on something positive, reminding herself that most people at the party were kind and welcoming. She slowly rolled toward a table with snacks, hoping to grab a little bite without drawing too much attention. But the group of teenagers had already noticed her approach. One of them nudged the other and snickered, pointing in her direction. Their laughter grew louder, and soon the whispers turned into cruel comments. "Look at her," one of them said. "She thinks she belongs here."
Oh.
The girl's hands tightened on the wheels, her heart pounding as she tried to move past them. She hoped they would just let her go and not make a scene. Instead, the bullying escalated. One of the boys stepped in front of her path, blocking her way, while another started to mock her movements. "Move out of the way, cripple," he shouted, his voice cruel and sharp. She flinched, feeling a mix of fear and shame, unsure of how to respond. Her voice caught in her throat, and tears pricked at her eyes. Some of the other guests turned to watch, curiosity written on their faces, but no one stepped forward to intervene. The girl felt a heavy weight of loneliness settle over her, as if everyone had forgotten her humanity in that moment. She tried to navigate her wheelchair around the boy, but he deliberately shifted to block her path again. Each time she moved, he followed, his laughter ringing cruelly in her ears. The girl's hands trembled, gripping the wheels tightly as she tried to steady herself. Her mind raced, trying to think of a way to escape the situation without causing more attention or drawing anger from the bullies. She wished she could just disappear, melt into the floor, or vanish from the party entirely. As the tension built, the other teenagers joined in. They whispered insults, made rude gestures, and even started pushing her wheelchair slightly, testing her balance, and laughing at her discomfort. The girl's body shook, both from fear and anger, but she felt trapped. Her wheelchair made her slower than anyone else, and in the crowded room, she could not maneuver quickly enough to get away. The laughter around her felt like 1,000 tiny knives, each one cutting a little deeper into her confidence and joy. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the words caught in her throat. The embarrassment burned her cheeks as she realized how many eyes were now on her, watching her struggle. Some guests whispered to each other, unsure if they should intervene or ignore the situation. The party continued around her, a strange mix of celebration and cruelty that made her feel completely isolated. Her parents were talking to other adults across the room, laughing and enjoying the party. Unaware of the intensity of what was happening to their daughter, she looked around desperately, hoping someone would notice her distress. someone who would step forward and stop the bullying. It was at that moment, hidden in the corner of the room, that the maid noticed everything. She had been tidying up quietly, keeping an eye on the party from a distance, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She saw the way the bullies surrounded the girl, the way her small body trembled, and the fear in her eyes. Without a second thought, she decided she could not stand by any longer. The maid had always been protective of the children in the house. She knew that her voice, calm yet firm, could make a difference. She walked steadily toward the scene, her heart pounding with determination, knowing that this moment called for courage. Meanwhile, the girl in the wheelchair continued to struggle, trying to push past the bullies. One of them gave her a sharp shove, causing her chair to tip slightly. She gasped, clutching the sides of the wheelchair to steady herself. Tears slipped down her face, her dress fluttering as she tried to remain upright. The laughter of the bullies seemed louder than ever, echoing in her ears and making her feel small and powerless. She wanted someone to help her. Anyone. To tell these teenagers that their behavior was cruel and wrong. As the maid approached, the room seemed to hold its breath. The music continued, but the atmosphere shifted. Guests began to notice the maid's purposeful steps and the way she looked at the bullies with unwavering focus. The girl sensed hope, a small spark that maybe she would not be alone in this fight. She felt the maid's presence like a shield, protecting her from the growing cruelty surrounding her. The tension in the room was palpable. The bullies paused for a moment, uncertain of how to respond to the maid's calm authority. The girl, still trembling, felt a glimmer of safety as the maid drew closer, her expression firm yet gentle. She could almost hear the unspoken message, "You are not alone, and someone is here to defend you." Her hands relaxed slightly on the wheels, her tears beginning to dry as the maid's presence gave her a sense of strength she had not felt moments before. In that moment, the party continued around them, but the focus had shifted. The guests watched silently, realizing that something important was unfolding before their eyes. The girl's small frame seemed less fragile now, bolstered by the unseen courage of the maid moving closer to her side. And though fear still lingered, a quiet sense of anticipation filled the room, as if everyone knew that this moment would not end with cruelty, but with someone standing up for what was right. The maid reached the girl and knelt beside her wheelchair, speaking softly but firmly, reassuring her that she was safe now. The bullies, caught off guard by the sudden presence of authority and kindness, hesitated. The girl, sensing the shift, took a deep breath and allowed herself to feel a small measure of relief. For the first time in what felt like hours, she could believe that she would not have to face this torment alone. The maid's intervention was only the beginning, but it was enough to spark hope. Enough to make the girl feel seen and valued in a world that often overlooked her. The party had reached its full swing. With music vibrating through the room and laughter bouncing off the walls, colorful lights danced over the faces of the guests, making the atmosphere feel both magical and overwhelming. The young girl in the wheelchair was still near the center, though now she clung to the presence of the maid like a lifeline. The moment of confrontation had passed, but the tension had not completely disappeared. The bullies were not ready to give up yet, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Waiting to see what would happen next, the group of teenagers huddled together, whispering furiously. Their earlier confidence had been shaken by the maid's firm stance, but they were not ready to retreat completely. One of the boys, with a sneer still on his face, stepped forward and tried to push the wheelchair again, this time more carefully, as if testing the limits of what they could get away with. The girl felt her hands tighten on the wheels, bracing herself against another potential shove. Her heart raced, and she looked toward the maid, silently pleading for protection. The maid's eyes met hers, calm and determined, and it gave her a small sense of courage. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself for whatever might come next. Some guests began to murmur quietly, their voices filled with curiosity and concern. A few whispered to each other about the rudeness of the teenagers, but none had yet stepped forward. The girl wished she could speak, could tell them how terrified she felt, but the words wouldn't come. She felt the weight of embarrassment and fear pressing down on her, making her smaller and quieter. She focused only on the maid, who now slowly moved to position herself directly between her and the bullies. It was a subtle shift, but it changed everything. The girl could feel a barrier of safety forming around her. The bullies were not used to being confronted. They glanced at each other, their faces a mix of frustration and disbelief. They had expected to intimidate someone who could not easily fight back, someone who would stay quiet and scared. But the maid's presence disrupted their expectations. She was not angry, nor was she yelling. She simply stood there, steady and unwavering, and that made them uncomfortable. The leader of the group opened his mouth, clearly trying to come up with another insult, but the words faltered. The room seemed to pause, as if holding its breath along with the girl. The girl slowly turned her wheelchair slightly, moving away from the bullies while keeping her eyes on the maid. Her hands shook less now, though a tremor still ran through her fingers. She could feel the support. Even if the room around her was still filled with people who might not understand what was happening. The maid knelt beside her for a moment, speaking softly in a voice that carried both authority and warmth. She told her it was okay to be afraid, that she was safe now, and that she didn't have to face the cruelty of others alone. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were not just from fear, they were from relief. From feeling that someone genuinely cared. Despite the calm intervention, the bullies were not completely deterred. They whispered and muttered among themselves, plotting another attempt to embarrass the girl. One of them slowly circled around the side, trying to find a way past the maid without drawing too much attention. The girl noticed the movement, her heart beginning to race again. She felt the familiar knot of fear tighten in her stomach, but the maid's hand gently rested on her shoulder, grounding her, giving her the courage to stay calm. She realized she was not helpless, not entirely, because someone was standing with her. The maid's gaze followed the boy as he tried to maneuver. Her posture was steady, and her voice, though quiet, carried a firmness that made it clear she would not let him pass. The bullies began to feel the first twinges of doubt. Their laughter had become more nervous, their movements more hesitant. The atmosphere of confidence they had brought into the room was slipping away, replaced by uncertainty. The girl, sensing this, felt a flicker of hope. She was still afraid, but she could see that the tide was turning, that maybe she could get through this without being hurt or humiliated further. Some of the other guests, who had been watching silently, began to whisper among themselves. They noticed the courage of the maid, the bravery she displayed in standing up for someone so small and vulnerable. Their curiosity turned into admiration. A few of them shifted closer, unsure if they would intervene, but willing to witness that something meaningful was unfolding. The girl felt their eyes on her, and though some were still uncertain, she felt that she was no longer completely invisible. She felt a sense of connection, a subtle support forming around her that went beyond the maid's immediate protection. The bullies, realizing that their previous tactics were failing, decided to escalate. One of the boys reached out to grab the wheelchair's handle, attempting to push her forward roughly. The girl's hands shot out instinctively to stop him, but the motion was awkward and panicked. The maid moved faster than anyone could have expected, intercepting the boy and blocking his hand. Her voice, low but commanding, told him to stop immediately. The boy froze, caught off guard by the sudden authority and determination in her tone. He glanced at his friends, who were now equally unsure of what to do, their bravado fading in the face of genuine courage. The girl took a moment to steady her breath. Her chest rose and fell quickly, and her eyes shone with tears that reflected the colorful lights of the party. She felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, relief, and a small spark of pride. She realized that she had survived the immediate threat and that she was not alone. The maid stayed by her side, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, whispering reassurance and encouragement. The girl could feel the steady strength emanating from the woman, and it gave her a sense of calm that she had not felt since the bullies first approached her. Slowly, the maid guided her toward a quieter corner of the room, away from the main crowd. The girl's hands rested on the wheels, her movements tentative but deliberate. She felt the warmth of the maid's presence beside her, a protective shield against the harshness of the bullies. The music continued to play and the party went on around them. But the girl felt a small island of safety forming, a place where she could catch her breath and regain her composure. The bullies lingered for a moment, whispering among themselves, clearly unsure of how to proceed. Their plan to intimidate and humiliate the girl had failed. The girl watched them carefully, her initial fear still present but less overwhelming. She realized that the maid had not only protected her from physical harm, but had also given her a sense of dignity and worth. The simple act of standing up for her, of refusing to let the bullies continue their cruelty, had changed everything. It made her feel seen, valued, and, most importantly, safe. The maid crouched beside her wheelchair, adjusting the girl's position slightly to make her more comfortable. She spoke softly, her words full of empathy and understanding. She reminded the girl that it was okay to be scared, that fear did not make her weak, and that she had nothing to be ashamed of. The girl listened, absorbing every word, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. She looked around the room, noticing the guests who were now watching the scene unfold, some nodding quietly in approval of the maid's courage. The girl realized that she was not entirely alone in this world, that kindness and bravery could appear when least expected. As they remained in the quieter corner, the girl's mind began to process what had happened. She thought about the fear she had felt, the humiliation, and the sudden relief of having someone intervene. The contrast was stark, almost unbelievable. She had gone from feeling trapped and powerless to feeling protected and acknowledged. Her hands rested lightly on the wheels, and she allowed herself a small, tentative smile. The maid's presence had made all the difference. And the girl knew she would never forget the courage that had stepped in when she needed it most. In that moment, the party continued around them, but it no longer felt threatening. The girl's fear had not vanished entirely, but it had been tempered by a newfound sense of security. She realized that even in a world where people could be cruel, there were also those who would step up, who would protect and defend without hesitation. And in the midst of the music, laughter, and celebration, she felt a quiet sense of hope, a belief that she could face difficult moments with support and bravery guiding her way. The music continued to play, but a subtle shift had taken place in the room. The carefree laughter and chatter seemed softer, quieter, as if the party itself had sensed the tension that still lingered. The young girl in the wheelchair sat slightly forward, her hands resting on the wheels, feeling the reassuring presence of the maid beside her. She had been through fear and relief in quick succession, and now she felt a small flicker of courage, fueled by the knowledge that she was not alone. The bullies, however, were far from finished. Their faces twisted with frustration, anger, and embarrassment. They had expected the girl to remain an easy target, someone they could intimidate without consequences. But the maid had disrupted their expectations, and now they fumed quietly, trying to regain control. One of them whispered something to the others, and they exchanged glances, clearly plotting their next move. They thought if they worked together they could still frighten her. But the maid was alert, her eyes never leaving the group, her stance steady and commanding, ready to intervene at the first sign of aggression. The girl felt a shiver of nervous anticipation. She wanted to shrink back, to disappear into herself, but the maid's steady hand on her shoulder grounded her. She drew a deep breath, letting it out slowly, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. She watched as the bullies moved a little closer, their whispering now turning into low, mocking laughter. One boy stepped forward, his tone cruel and sneering. "Think you're so special just because someone is protecting you?" he said, his voice sharp and cutting. The girl flinched at the words, but the maid did not flinch. She stepped slightly in front of the girl, positioning herself directly between them. Her voice, calm but firm, carried across the room, cutting through the chatter and the music. "Leave her alone," she said. "She doesn't deserve your cruelty, and I won't let you hurt her." The simplicity of the words belied the strength behind them. There was no yelling, no anger, only quiet authority that left no room for argument. The bullies froze, clearly taken aback by the maid's courage and composure. They had not expected anyone to speak to them like that, much less someone they had underestimated so completely. The girl felt a rush of gratitude and relief. The fear that had gripped her moments before began to ebb, replaced by a tentative sense of security. She realized that the maid was more than just a helper at the party. She was a protector, someone who would stand up for her when others would not. Her hands, which had been trembling, now rested more lightly on the wheels. She took a small, cautious breath, allowing herself to focus on the maid's calm presence instead of the looming threat of the bullies. But the bullies were not ready to surrender entirely. They circled around the girl and the maid, trying to find a way to undermine the authority that had so suddenly appeared. One of the boys tried to lean over and make a mocking gesture, but the maid's eyes followed his every move. With a single step, she closed the space between them, her posture steady and unwavering. "Back off," she said again, her voice carrying a quiet, undeniable authority. Now, there was no room for argument in her tone. Only a clear message that continued aggression would not be tolerated. The other guests began to notice the confrontation. Some whispered to each other, commenting on the bravery of the maid and the audacity of the bullies. The atmosphere in the room shifted as more eyes turned toward the scene. For the first time, the bullies felt the pressure, not only from the maid, but also from the awareness of the crowd. They could feel judgment settling on them, a quiet expectation that they should act with decency. Though their pride and anger made them hesitate, the girl, sensing this shift, felt her own courage grow slightly. She realized that the presence of others, even those watching silently, could make a difference. The maid knelt beside her for a moment, gently adjusting her position in the wheelchair and speaking softly. "You are safe now," she said. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Stay calm and trust that this will end." The girl nodded, drawing strength from the words and from the simple, unwavering courage of the woman beside her. The bullies, however, were stubborn. One of them took a small step forward, trying to appear fearless, but the maid was ready. She moved smoothly, closing the space and speaking with quiet authority. "Step back," she said, her voice firm. "You will not intimidate her. Not here. Not ever." The boy hesitated, clearly unprepared for the direct confrontation. His friends exchanged nervous glances, realizing that the confidence they had relied on so heavily was slipping away. The room seemed to hold its breath, watching the tension between the small group of teenagers and the maid, who stood as a shield of courage. The girl's hands gripped the wheels, but she no longer felt paralyzed by fear. She watched the bullies carefully, noticing their hesitation, their faltering expressions, and she felt a small sense of empowerment. She could feel the protective energy radiating from the maid, and it reminded her that she was not defined by the cruelty of others. She was capable of being defended, of standing with someone who cared for her well-being. Her chest rose and fell steadily, and she allowed herself a small, tentative smile. First since the bullying had begun. The maid continued to speak to the bullies, her voice calm but resolute. She reminded them quietly that their actions were not acceptable, that hurting someone who could not fight back was wrong. The power in her voice was not loud or aggressive. It was steady, measured, and unwavering. The bullies began to falter, unsure of how to respond. Their bravado, which had seemed so strong at the start of the evening, was fading. They looked at each other, realizing that their plan to intimidate the girl had failed spectacularly. Some of the guests moved closer, sensing that the confrontation was reaching its climax. Their eyes were fixed on the girl and the maid, and slowly, whispers of admiration for the woman's courage began to ripple through the crowd. A few older children nodded in approval, and some adults exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the bravery on display. The girl felt the warmth of that silent support, a network of unspoken allies that made her feel less alone and more valued. The bullies, now unsure of themselves, attempted one last gesture to regain control. One boy reached out, trying to touch the wheelchair in a threatening manner. The maid moved instantly, intercepting his hand with a firm but gentle hold. "Enough," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "You will not touch her again. Understand?" The boy froze, caught in the quiet authority that radiated from the maid. The others looked on, their confidence shattered, unsure of what to do next. The room seemed to pause, waiting for the inevitable collapse of their plan. The girl's heart began to settle. As she realized the immediate danger had passed, the maid remained close, keeping a protective watch over her. The tension in her body slowly eased, and she felt a sense of gratitude so deep it almost overwhelmed her. She had been terrified moments before, but now she felt a mixture of relief and empowerment. She realized that courage did not always come from being the strongest. Sometimes it came from standing firm, from speaking quietly but decisively, and from refusing to let fear dictate actions. The bullies, defeated in spirit if not yet in action, slowly retreated. They exchanged glances, their faces showing a mix of shame and anger. They muttered under their breath but stepped back, unable to continue their intimidation. The maid remained vigilant, her eyes following them until they were far enough away that the girl was no longer at risk. She then turned her attention fully to the girl, speaking softly and reassuringly. "It's okay now," she said. "They cannot hurt you anymore. You were brave, and you stayed strong. Remember that." The girl nodded, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. She felt the strength of the maid's support, and it reminded her that even in frightening situations, there was hope. Courage could appear in unexpected forms, and someone's willingness to stand up for what was right could change everything. She looked around the room, noticing that the guests were now more attentive, more aware of the dynamics that had unfolded. Some smiled quietly at her. Others nodded toward the maid in silent admiration. She felt a quiet sense of connection, a recognition that kindness and bravery mattered, even when fear and cruelty seemed overwhelming, as the music played softly in the background. The girl settled into her wheelchair with a newfound sense of calm. The maid stayed beside her, offering comfort and protection. The bullies had retreated, and for the first time that evening, she could breathe without the immediate weight of fear pressing down on her. She realized that courage was not just about facing danger alone, but about finding someone to stand with her, to help her navigate the challenges that life placed in her path. The maid had done that, and in that simple act, she had given the girl a gift that would stay with her forever. The atmosphere in the party room had shifted. The music played, but its cheerful notes were now accompanied by a sense of awareness among the guests. Whispers traveled softly through the crowd as people talked quietly to each other about the courage they had just witnessed. The young girl in the wheelchair sat slightly forward, her hands resting gently on the wheels, while the maid stayed close, her presence steady and reassuring. For the first time that evening, the girl felt a sense of safety and calm. Though the echoes of the bullies' laughter still lingered in the corners of her mind, the bullies had retreated to a distance, uncertain and uneasy. They whispered among themselves, glancing at the girl and the maid, but it was clear that their power had diminished. Their confidence was gone, replaced by a growing awareness that their actions had consequences. The girl, noticing this, felt a flicker of courage. She realized that the bullies' attempts to intimidate her had failed, and she could now sit quietly without immediate fear. The maid's hand on her shoulder was a constant reminder that she was not alone, and that even the smallest act of kindness and courage could make a powerful difference. Guests began to shift their attention from the music and conversation to the unfolding scene. A few older children approached hesitantly, curious about what had happened. Their expressions reflected admiration and newfound respect for the girl, who had endured the cruelty without giving in to panic or despair. One of them whispered quietly to a friend, "She's really brave," acknowledging her resilience in the face of unkindness. The girl's heart swelled with a small sense of pride. For the first time, she realized that her courage mattered, and that others could see it too. The maid gently guided the girl toward a quieter corner of the room. Away from the main flow of guests and the lingering presence of the bullies, she spoke softly, her words full of warmth and reassurance. "You did very well," she said. "I'm proud of you. You stayed strong even when it was hard. That is something to remember." The girl nodded, her eyes glistening with tears, not of fear now, but of relief and gratitude. The warmth of the maid's presence and the knowledge that someone had stood up for her brought a sense of peace that she had not felt earlier. As the girl settled, other guests began to approach slowly. They wanted to check if she was okay, to offer words of encouragement or simple smiles. Each small interaction made her feel a little more accepted, a little more included in the party that had felt so intimidating before. One of the older guests, a young woman with a kind face, knelt down to be at eye level with the girl. She smiled and said, "I saw what happened. You were amazing. You didn't let them scare you?" The girl's lips curved into a shy smile. These small gestures, simple as they were, felt like lifelines, helping her realize that courage could inspire kindness in others. The maid remained close, silently watching the interactions and ensuring the girl felt safe. She could sense the transformation in the room, the way the guests were beginning to take notice of their actions and their impact. Some of the adults whispered quietly among themselves, discussing how important it was to stand up against cruelty and how even small acts of bravery could have a ripple effect. The girl, hearing bits and pieces of the conversation, felt her confidence grow. She realized that the bullies had lost their power not just because the maid had intervened, but also because others were now aware and supportive. The sense of community, even quiet and understated, provided strength. The bullies, now aware that the eyes of the party were on them, began to retreat further, their whispers subdued. They looked around at the guests who were watching with approval and admiration for the girl and the maid. Their plan to dominate and intimidate had failed, and the social pressure began to weigh on them. One of them muttered something under his breath, but no one paid attention. And slowly they slinked away, their arrogance replaced with uncertainty. The girl watched them go, her hands relaxing slightly on the wheels. She felt a lightness in her chest, a small sense of victory over the fear that had consumed her moments before. The maid guided her to a small table with refreshments, offering her a drink and encouraging her to rest for a moment. The girl accepted, her hands trembling just a little as she took the cup. The warmth of the liquid in her hands helped ground her, and she felt a sense of normalcy returning. She looked around the room, noticing that the atmosphere had changed. The music and laughter continued. But now there was a sense of respect and mindfulness among the guests. People were watching their actions more carefully, aware that their words and behavior had weight, and that kindness mattered just as much as celebration. A few children approached, offering to share snacks or play a quiet game nearby. The girl smiled, feeling included for the first time that evening. She realized that the courage she had shown, combined with the maid's protection, had allowed others to see her not as someone to pity or mock, but as a person with strength and value. Each small interaction helped her feel more confident, more capable of facing the world around her. The maid stayed beside her, offering encouragement and gentle advice. She spoke quietly about resilience, about how fear could be faced and overcome when someone stood with you. "You don't have to be alone in this," she said. "There are people who will stand by you, who will help you when things feel impossible. Remember this moment, and remember that you are strong." The girl listened intently, absorbing each word. Her eyes shone with understanding and appreciation. The lesson was clear. Courage was not just about facing danger alone, but about allowing support and kindness to guide you through challenges. The atmosphere in the room continued to evolve. Guests began to celebrate the party more consciously, with an awareness that kindness and respect mattered. Conversations became more inclusive. The girl found herself smiling and laughing quietly as she felt accepted by those around her. The maid remained vigilant, a constant presence of safety and guidance, but allowed the girl to engage with others at her own pace. The girl felt a sense of empowerment that was new and refreshing. She realized that she could face difficult situations and still find moments of joy and connection. The bullies, now completely marginalized by the collective awareness and the maid's firm stance, finally left the immediate area. They retreated to a corner where they whispered among themselves, their confidence shattered. The girl watched them go, feeling a quiet triumph. She realized that she had survived the ordeal, and more importantly, she had done so with dignity and support. The presence of the maid had made all the difference, showing her that courage and kindness could change even the most frightening situations. As the party continued, the girl began to interact more with the other guests. She shared smiles, laughter, and small conversations, feeling a sense of belonging that had been absent earlier. The maid watched with quiet pride, knowing that her intervention had not only protected the girl, but also created an environment where she could thrive. The young girl realized that bravery could take many forms. It could be the act of standing up, the courage to face fear, and the willingness to accept support from others. By the end of the evening, the girl had grown noticeably more confident. She engaged in games, laughed with children her own age, and felt included in conversations that had seemed impossible earlier. The maid stayed nearby, offering guidance and encouragement when needed, but allowing the girl the space to enjoy herself. The atmosphere had transformed from one of tension and fear to one of celebration, connection, and understanding. The young girl reflected on the events of the evening. Realizing that the courage shown by the maid had ripple effects that went beyond her own safety, the bullies had learned a lesson in humility and respect. The guests had witnessed an example of quiet bravery and the power of standing up for what is right. The girl understood that moments of fear could be met with courage, and that support from others could transform even the most difficult situations. As the party drew to a close, the girl felt a sense of accomplishment and pride. She had faced fear, experienced cruelty, and yet had emerged with her dignity intact. The maid remained by her side, a steadfast protector and mentor. The girl understood that courage was not about being fearless, but about facing challenges with support, resilience, and the willingness to trust in the kindness of others. The lessons of the evening would stay with her, a reminder that even in a world where cruelty exists, bravery, compassion, solidarity can shine brighter and create lasting change.